Laura Bennett lived a quiet life in the suburbs of Virginia. She was the kind of person who preferred staying out of the spotlight, even though her husband, Matthew Bennett, held one of the most powerful positions in the country as the director of the CIA. Laura enjoyed simple pleasures, gardening, reading, and taking long evening walks around her neighborhood. Her days were predictable, and she liked it that way. But on this particular evening, everything changed. It was a cool autumn night and the air smelled faintly of fallen leaves. Laura wrapped a light scarf around her neck and stepped outside. The streets were calm, with only the occasional car passing by. Streetlights cast soft glows on the pavement, and the sound of crickets filled the silence. Laura loved these moments when the world seemed to slow down, giving her time to think and reflect. As she strolled along the sidewalk, she noticed how the moonlight shimmered on the surface of a nearby pond. It was peaceful, almost magical. But peace has a way of vanishing quickly when you least expect it. As Laura approached the corner of Maple Street, she heard the low rumble of an engine behind her. At first, she didn't pay much attention. It was just another car driving through the neighborhood. But then the sound grew louder, and bright headlights illuminated the road ahead. A police cruiser pulled up beside her, its tires crunching against the gravel. Two officers stepped out, their uniforms crisp and their expressions stern. One of them, a tall man with sharp features and piercing eyes, introduced himself as Officer Frank Myers. The other, shorter but equally imposing, was Officer Carl Logan. "Evening, ma'am," Frank said, his tone clipped and formal. "Mind if we ask you a few questions?" Laura stopped walking and turned to face them. She felt a flicker of unease but forced herself to remain calm. "Of course," she replied politely. "Is there something wrong?" Frank glanced at Carl before answering. "We're conducting routine checks in the area, just making sure everyone's safe. Can I see your ID, please?" Laura nodded and reached into her bag for her wallet. She handed over her driver's license without hesitation. While Frank examined it closely, Carl began scanning the surroundings, his gaze lingering on Laura's expensive sedan parked a short distance away. His expression shifted slightly, as if he'd discovered something interesting. "This is your car?" Carl asked, pointing toward the vehicle. "Yes, it is," Laura answered matter-of-factly. "Is there a problem with it?" Carl shrugged, but there was something unsettling about his demeanor. "Nice ride," he muttered under his breath. "Must be nice to afford something like that." Laura ignored the comment and focused on Frank, who was still studying her license. After what felt like an eternity, he finally handed it back to her. "Everything seems to be in order," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But tell me, Mrs. Bennett, what brings you out here so late? Not many people take walks this time of night." "I live just down the block," Laura explained, gesturing toward her house. "I often go for walks after dinner. It helps me relax." Frank raised an eyebrow. "Relax, huh? Must be nice to have such a carefree life." His words carried a hint of sarcasm, and Laura couldn't help but feel uneasy. There was something off about the way he spoke, as if he already knew who she was and wanted to test her. She decided to keep her responses short and professional. "It's just my routine," she said simply. For a moment, neither officer said anything. They exchanged a glance, and Laura caught a glimpse of something unspoken passing between them. Then Frank leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a lower register. "You know, Mrs. Bennett, it's not every day we run into someone connected to influential circles." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "People like you tend to attract attention, sometimes unwanted attention." Laura's heart skipped a beat, but she refused to let her discomfort show. "I'm not sure what you mean," she replied evenly. "I'm just a regular person trying to enjoy my evening." Frank smirked, clearly amused by her response. "Regular people don't usually drive luxury cars or live in gated communities," he countered. "And they certainly don't marry into the CIA." The mention of the CIA sent a chill down Laura's spine. She had always been careful to avoid drawing attention to her husband's job, knowing how dangerous it could be to mix personal and professional lives. Yet here was this man deliberately poking at a subject she had worked hard to keep private. Something wasn't right. Before Laura could respond, Carl chimed in. "Maybe she's got nothing to hide," he said, feigning innocence. "Or maybe she does. Hard to say, isn't it?" Laura clenched her fists subtly, her mind racing. These men weren't conducting a routine check. They were fishing for information, and whatever they were looking for, they weren't finding it easily. Still, she needed to end this conversation before it went any further. "If that's all, officers, I'd like to get back to my walk," she said firmly, stepping backward. "Thank you for ensuring the neighborhood's safety." Frank's smirk widened. "Don't let us stop you, ma'am," he said mockingly. "Just remember, people are watching. Always." With that cryptic warning, the two officers returned to their cruiser and drove off, leaving Laura standing alone on the empty street. For several minutes, she didn't move. Her mind replayed the encounter over and over, each detail growing sharper with every passing second. What had just happened? Why had those officers singled her out? And what did they hope to gain by bringing up her husband's position? As she resumed her walk, Laura realized she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the last she'd hear from Frank and Carl. Something about their behavior told her they weren't done, not by a long shot. Back. At home, Laura locked the door behind her and leaned against it, exhaling deeply. She debated whether to tell Matthew about the incident, but decided against it, for now. He was already dealing with enough stress at work, and she didn't want to burden him unnecessarily. Besides, she reasoned, it might have just been a harmless attempt to rattle her. Nothing more. Little did she know, her instincts were far sharper than she gave herself credit for. Far away, in a dimly lit room, Frank and Carl were huddled together, plotting their next move. They had no idea who they were dealing with or the consequences that awaited them. The next morning, Laura woke up feeling uneasy. The encounter with the two officers lingered in her mind like a shadow she couldn't shake off. She tried to focus on her usual routine, making breakfast, watering the plants, and reading the CO news, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Frank Meyer's smug expression and Carl Logan's probing questions. Something about their behavior felt calculated, almost predatory. Laura couldn't help but wonder if they were planning something bigger. Later that afternoon, as she was sorting through some mail, an envelope slipped out of the stack and landed on the floor. It was plain white, with no return address or stamp. Laura frowned. Someone must have dropped it off directly at her doorstep. Curiosity got the better of her, and she opened it carefully. Inside were several photographs taken the previous night during her walk. At first glance, the pictures seemed harmless enough. They showed her crossing the street, standing near her car, and briefly speaking with Mr. Harper, an elderly neighbor, who sometimes helped her carry groceries. But when Laura flipped the photos over, she found a note scribbled on the back in messy handwriting. "We know what you're hiding. Pay us $50,000 by Friday, or these pictures will end up in the wrong hands." Laura's blood ran cold. She stared at the note, her mind racing. What could they possibly think she was hiding? Her life was ordinary, or at least it had been until last night. She knew exactly who "we" referred to. Frank and Carl. Their vague threats during the traffic stop now made perfect sense. This wasn't just about intimidation, it was blackmail. For a moment, Laura considered calling Matthew. He would know how to handle this kind of situation. After all, dealing with threats came with the territory of being the CIA director. But something stopped her. If word got out that his wife had been targeted by corrupt cops, it could damage his reputation, and worse, put their family in even greater danger. No, she needed to act carefully and quietly. Instead of reaching for the phone, Laura grabbed her coat and headed to her car. She drove to a small cafe on the outskirts of town where she often met her close friend Rachel Miller. Rachel was sharp-witted and resourceful, with a background in investigative journalism. Although she no longer worked full-time in media, she occasionally consulted for government agencies and private clients. Laura trusted her completely. When Rachel saw Laura walk into the cafe, She immediately noticed the tension in her friend's face. "What's wrong?" Rachel asked without preamble as Laura slid into the booth across from her. Laura hesitated for a second, then pulled out the envelope and placed it on the table. "I need your help," she said simply. Rachel opened the envelope and examined the contents. Her eyes widened as she read the note. "Who sent this?" she demanded. "It's those two officers from last night," Laura explained. "They stopped me while I was walking and started asking strange questions. I thought they were just trying to rattle me, but now I'm not so sure." Rachel leaned back in her seat, tapping her fingers against the edge of the table. "This is serious," she said after a pause. "If they're willing to go this far, they won't stop unless we make them." "I don't want to pay them," Laura said firmly. "That's exactly what they want, to scare me into giving them money. But I also can't let this slide. Who knows what else they might do?" Rachel nodded. "You're right. We need to turn this around, make them regret ever messing with you." Over the next hour, the two women devised a plan. First, they decided to gather evidence. Blackmail relied on secrecy, and exposing Frank and Carl's scheme would destroy their leverage. To do that, Laura would arrange a meeting with the officers, under the pretense of handing over the money. Meanwhile, Rachel would set up a hidden recording device to capture everything they said. If things went according to plan, they'd have undeniable proof of the officers' corruption. But Laura and Rachel knew they couldn't do this alone. They needed someone technical savvy to ensure the operation ran smoothly. Rachel suggested reaching out to Daniel Carter, a former colleague of hers who specialized in surveillance technology. Though he usually worked on high-profile cases, Rachel assured Laura that Daniel owed her a favor and would agree to help. That evening, Laura called Daniel and explained the situation. To her relief, he didn't hesitate. "Leave it to me," he said confidently. "I'll take care of everything." By the following day, preparations were underway. Daniel equipped Laura with a tiny microphone hidden inside a pendant necklace. He also installed a GPS tracker in her purse to monitor her location in real time. "Just in case something goes wrong," he explained, "we'll be able to track you instantly." Meanwhile, Laura drafted a message to Frank and Carl, pretending to comply with their demands. She wrote down instructions to meet her at an abandoned parking lot near the highway at midnight. The location was remote enough to avoid drawing attention but still accessible in case backup was needed. Once the message was ready, she slipped it into a mailbox outside the police station, knowing they'd find it soon enough. As the hours ticked by, Laura alternated between nervousness and determination. She hated the idea of confronting the officers again, but she refused to let fear dictate her actions. This wasn't just about protecting herself. It was about standing up to bullies who thought they could exploit others without consequences. That night, as she prepared to leave for the meeting, Laura took a deep breath and looked at herself in the mirror. The necklace with the hidden microphone rested gently around her neck, its presence both comforting and daunting. She reminded herself why she was doing this, not just for her own sake, but for anyone else who might fall victim to Frank and Carl's schemes. When she arrived at the parking lot, the area was eerily quiet. Only one car was parked nearby, a beat-up sedan with dim headlights glowing faintly. As expected, Frank and Carl stepped out of the vehicle, their figures silhouetted against the weak light. They approached her cautiously, their expressions unreadable. "You brought the cash?" Frank asked, cutting straight to the point. Laura nodded and held up a briefcase. "It's all here," she lied. In reality, the case contained nothing but old newspapers. "But I want assurances that this will be the end of it. No more threats, no more photos." Carl smirked. "Don't worry, Mrs. Bennett. Consider this a business transaction. Once we have the money, you'll never hear from us again." Frank gestured for her to hand over the briefcase. As Laura complied, she subtly activated the recording device. Every word they spoke was now being captured, clear as day. "You've made a smart choice," Frank continued, his tone dripping with condescension. "Most people wouldn't survive what we could do to them. You're lucky we're reasonable men." Laura forced herself to smile, though inside she seethed with anger. "I'm glad we could come to an agreement." While Frank gloated about their supposed cleverness, Carl grew increasingly restless. He glanced around nervously as if expecting someone to jump out of the shadows. "Let's wrap this up," he muttered. "The longer we stay here, the riskier it gets." Frank ignored him and turned back to Laura. "Remember, keep your mouth shut about this. If anyone finds out, well, let's just say it won't end well for you or your husband." "Oh, I'll keep quiet," Laura replied coolly. "But I suggest you do the same, because if anything happens to me or my family, you'll wish you'd never crossed paths with us." Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. For the first time, Frank's confidence faltered. He studied her for a moment, searching for signs of bluffing, but Laura's expression remained impassive. Finally, the officers took the briefcase and returned to their car. As they drove away, Laura exhaled deeply, realizing she had played her part perfectly. Now it was up to Rachel and Daniel to analyze the recordings and build a solid case against them. Back home, Laura reviewed the events of the night with Rachel and Daniel. The audio was crystal clear, capturing every boastful remark and thinly veiled threat. With this evidence, they could expose Frank and Carl's corruption and bring them to justice. But Laura knew this was only the beginning. Taking down 2 rogue officers wouldn't fix the larger problem of systemic abuse within the police force. Still, it was a step in the right direction, and one she was proud to take. As she settled into bed that night, Laura allowed herself a small smile. The battle wasn't over yet, but she had proven something important. Even the most powerful bullies could be brought down, if you had the courage to stand up to them. The morning after the meeting in the parking lot, Laura felt a mix of relief and unease. She had successfully recorded Frank and Carl's incriminating words, but now came the hard part, turning that evidence into action. Sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee, she replayed the events of the previous night in her mind. Every detail was clear: their smug expressions, their arrogant remarks, and the way they thought they were untouchable. It made her blood boil, but it also fueled her determination to see this through. Rachel arrived shortly after breakfast, carrying her laptop and a stack of papers. "Let's get to work," she said briskly, setting everything down on the table. "Daniel sent me the audio files from last night. He cleaned them up so we can hear everything clearly." Laura nodded, grateful for Rachel's efficiency. Together, they listened to the recording multiple times, pausing occasionally to jot down notes. The officers' voices were unmistakable: Frank's arrogant tone as he bragged about their power, and Carl's nervous interjections when things seemed too risky. They even mentioned names of other people involved in similar schemes, giving Laura and Rachel valuable leads to follow. "This is gold," Rachel said, leaning back in her chair. "With this, we can not only take down Frank and Carl, but also expose whoever else is connected to their operation." But Laura knew they couldn't act alone. Taking on corrupt cops required more than just evidence. It needed authority. That's why she decided it was time to involve Matthew. Though she had initially hesitated to tell him, she realized keeping him in the dark would only make things worse. Besides, his position as CIA director gave him access to resources that could ensure justice was served swiftly and effectively. When Matthew returned home that evening, Laura greeted him warmly before breaking the news. At first he listened silently, his expression unreadable. But as she explained the situation, from the traffic stop to the blackmail attempt and the sting operation, he grew increasingly concerned. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked, his voice tinged with frustration. "I didn't want to distract you," Laura replied honestly. "You're already dealing with so much at work. I thought I could handle it myself." Matthew sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Laura, I appreciate your strength, but situations like this aren't something you should face alone. These men are dangerous. If they found out we're onto them—" "They won't," Laura interrupted firmly. "We have the recordings, and Rachel has been digging deeper. We've already uncovered connections to others in the police department. All we need now is to escalate this to the right authorities. Matthew studied her for a moment, his gaze softening. You're incredible, you know that? Most people would have panicked, but you stayed calm and handled it brilliantly. Laura smiled faintly. I had help, and I'm not done yet. The next day, Matthew arranged a meeting with federal investigators. He handed over the recordings and briefed them on the case. The investigators were shocked by the audacity of Frank and Carl's actions, but assured Matthew they would prioritize the matter. Within hours, warrants were issued for the officers' arrests, along with subpoenas for their phone records, bank accounts, and communications. Meanwhile, Rachel continued her investigation, working closely with Daniel to trace the web of corruption further. Using advanced software, Daniel analyzed call logs and financial transactions linked to Frank and Carl. What they discovered was staggering. The two officers weren't acting alone. They were part of a larger network involving senior members of the police force who exploited their positions for personal gain. Some accepted bribes, while others facilitated illegal activities in exchange for kickbacks. As the pieces fell into place, Rachel shared her findings with Matthew's team. The scope of the scandal widened, implicating individuals far beyond what anyone had anticipated. The investigators realized they weren't dealing with isolated incidents of misconduct. They were uncovering systemic corruption embedded deep within the department. Back at home, Laura tried to stay focused on everyday tasks, but her mind kept drifting to the implications of what they had uncovered. She thought about the countless victims who must have suffered because of these men, the innocent people intimidated, extorted, or silenced. It made her sick to think such abuse of power had gone unchecked for so long. One afternoon, as she watered the plants in her garden, Mr. Harper, her elderly neighbor, stopped by to chat. You've seemed a bit distracted lately, he remarked kindly. Is everything all right? Laura hesitated, unsure how much to say. Finally, she settled on a vague explanation. Just some complications. But don't worry, I'm handling it. Mr. Harper nodded knowingly. Well, if there's anything I can do to help, let me know. You've always been good to me, Laura. His words warmed her heart. It reminded her that even in the darkest moments, kindness existed. And perhaps that was the key to fighting back against corruption, standing together and refusing to be silenced. By the end of the week, the net was closing in on Frank and Carl. Federal agents raided their homes early one morning, seizing documents, computers, and other evidence. Both men were taken into custody without incident, though their expressions ranged from shock to outright defiance. News of their arrest spread quickly, sparking outrage among the public. Many wondered how such blatant corruption had gone unnoticed for so long. For Laura, watching the fallout unfold brought a sense of vindication. But it wasn't enough. She wanted to ensure this never happened again, to anyone. Inspired by her experience, she began researching ways to advocate for reform within law enforcement. She reached out to organizations dedicated to combating police misconduct and offered her support. Her story resonated with many, and soon she found herself invited to speak at community forums and panel discussions. Rachel encouraged her every step of the way. You're making a difference, she told Laura during one of their meetings. People need to hear your voice. They need to know that standing up to injustice is possible, even when it feels impossible. Though the journey ahead would be challenging, Laura felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had faced fear and intimidation head-on and emerged stronger because of it. More importantly, she had proven that no one, not even those in positions of power, was above accountability. As she stood on her porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, Laura reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. The quiet life she once cherished now seemed distant, replaced by a mission to fight for justice. Yet she wouldn't trade it for anything. For the first time in her life, she truly understood the weight of courage and the impact it could have on the world. The days following Frank and Carl's arrest were a whirlwind of activity. News outlets across the country picked up the story, turning it into a national scandal. Headlines blared phrases like "corrupt cops exposed" and "blackmail ring," brought down by brave woman. Reporters camped outside Laura's house hoping to catch a glimpse of her or get an exclusive interview, but Laura remained out of sight, choosing instead to focus on the bigger picture. Federal investigators worked tirelessly to unravel the web of corruption that Frank and Carl had been part of. The evidence gathered from their homes and devices revealed shocking details about their operation. They weren't just extorting wealthy individuals like Laura. They were also involved in drug trafficking, money laundering, and even illegal surveillance of citizens. Their connections extended far beyond the local police force, implicating senior officials and politicians who had turned a blind eye in exchange for favors or bribes. Matthew played a crucial role in coordinating the investigation. As CIA director, he had access to resources and expertise that helped federal agents piece together the puzzle. He worked closely with Laura, keeping her informed every step of the way. Though she appreciated his support, Laura insisted on staying actively involved. This was her fight as much as anyone else's, and she refused to let others take over completely. One afternoon, Matthew called Laura into his home office. Papers and files covered the desk, along with several laptops displaying streams of data. "They've identified more names," he said, handing her a list. "These are the people directly connected to Frank and Carl. Some are cops, but others hold positions in City Hall and even state government." Laura scanned the names, her stomach sinking. She recognized a few of them. Local figures she'd seen at community events or read about in the news. It was disheartening to realize how widespread the corruption truly was. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now we move forward carefully," Matthew replied. "Each name will be investigated thoroughly. Those found guilty will face charges no matter how powerful they are." Though the process would take time, Laura felt a glimmer of hope. Justice might be slow, but it was finally within reach. Meanwhile, Rachel and Daniel continued their efforts to dig deeper into the scandal. Using advanced tools, they traced financial transactions and communications between suspects, uncovering patterns that linked them to criminal activities. One breakthrough came when Daniel discovered a secret offshore account used to funnel bribes and launder money. The account belonged to none other than Chief Raymond Gibbs, the head of the police department, a man who had publicly sworn to uphold integrity and transparency. "This is huge," Rachel said, showing Laura the evidence. "If we expose this, it'll bring down the entire leadership of the department." Laura nodded, though her excitement was tempered by caution. "We need to make sure everything is airtight before going public. These people won't go down without a fight." Rachel agreed. Together, they compiled all the information into a detailed report and handed it over to federal prosecutors. Within days, Chief Gibbs was arrested alongside several other high-ranking officials. The arrests sent shockwaves through the community, sparking protests and calls for reform. Many citizens demanded accountability, while others expressed anger at having trusted leaders who betrayed them. As the scandal unfolded, Laura became a symbol of resilience and courage. Her decision to stand up to Frank and Carl inspired countless others to share their own stories of abuse and intimidation. Community groups organized rallies, demanding changes to prevent such corruption in the future. Laura attended some of these events, speaking passionately about the importance of holding those in power accountable. "I'm not special," she told the crowd during one speech. "I'm just someone who refused to stay silent when faced with injustice. Each of you has the same power, to speak up, to act, and to demand better. Together, we can create a system that works for everyone, not just a select few." Her words resonated deeply, earning her praise from activists and ordinary citizens alike. Even critics who initially questioned why she hadn't reported the blackmail sooner began to acknowledge her bravery. Slowly but surely, the narrative shifted from skepticism to admiration. Despite the progress, Laura knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Rebuilding trust in law enforcement required more than just removing corrupt individuals. It meant implementing systemic reforms. She began working with advocacy groups to draft policies aimed at increasing transparency, improving oversight, and fostering accountability within police departments. Her efforts gained traction, attracting attention from lawmakers eager to address the issue. At home, life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. The media frenzy died down, and reporters stopped lingering outside her house. Laura cherished these quieter moments, finding comfort in simple routines like gardening and cooking. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that her life had changed forever. The woman who once preferred staying out of the spotlight now found herself at the center of a movement for change. Matthew noticed the toll it was taking on her. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, he placed a hand on hers. Knee. Months passed and the impact of Laura's actions continued to ripple through the community. The arrests of Frank, Carl, Chief Gibbs, and others had exposed a dark underbelly of corruption that many had suspected, but few could prove. Public outrage led to sweeping reforms within the police department, including stricter oversight, mandatory ethics training, and the establishment of an independent review board to investigate complaints against officers. For the first time in years, people began to feel hopeful about the future. Laura, however, didn't stop there. She knew that exposing corruption was only part of the solution. True change required addressing the root causes, systemic issues, like prejudice, lack of accountability, and unequal treatment under the law. Inspired by her experience, she decided to dedicate herself fully to advocacy work. She partnered with organizations fighting for police reform, racial justice, and transparency in government. Her story became a rallying cry for those who believed in fairness and equality. One day, while attending a meeting with activists, Laura met a young woman named Emily Dawson. Emily was a college student who had been organizing protests against police misconduct on her campus. She approached Laura after the session ended, her eyes filled with admiration. "What you did, it gave me hope," Emily said earnestly. "I want to do something meaningful too, but I don't know where to start." Laura smiled warmly. "Start small," she advised. "Change doesn't happen overnight. It begins with conversations, with raising awareness, and with standing up when it matters most. You're already doing that." Emily nodded, determination flickering in her expression. "Thank you. I'll keep going, no matter how hard it gets." Moments like these reminded Laura why she had chosen this path. Though it was exhausting at times, knowing she was making a difference kept her going. She also found strength in the support of her friends and family. Rachel remained a constant ally, helping Laura navigate the complexities of advocacy work. Daniel occasionally joined them, offering technical expertise whenever needed. And Matthew, despite his demanding job, made sure to be there for her emotionally, reminding her to take breaks and care for herself. As weeks turned into months, Laura's efforts began to gain national attention. She was invited to speak at conferences, appear on television shows, and write articles for major publications. At first, she felt out of place in these settings, unsure if her voice truly mattered. But as she shared her story, she realized how powerful personal experiences could be in inspiring change. People listened, not because she was famous or influential, but because her journey resonated with their own struggles. One evening, after returning from a speaking engagement in another city, Laura sat down with Matthew over dinner. "It's strange," she said thoughtfully. "A year ago, I never imagined I'd be doing any of this. I just wanted a quiet life." Matthew chuckled softly. "And now you've become a force to be reckoned with. I'm proud of you, Laura. You've accomplished so much." She smiled, though her gaze drifted toward the window. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard. "I didn't set out to be a leader or an activist," she admitted. "I just wanted to protect my family. But along the way, I realized that protecting ourselves means protecting others too." Matthew reached across the table and took her hand. "That's what makes you extraordinary. You turned something terrible into something good. Not just for us, but for everyone affected by this." The following week, Laura received news that marked a significant milestone in her journey. A new law aimed at increasing police accountability had been passed at the state level. Known as the Bennett Act, named in honor of Laura's courage, the legislation introduced measures such as body cameras for all officers, regular audits of police departments, and harsher penalties for misconduct. It was a victory not just for Laura, but for everyone who had fought tirelessly for reform. At the signing ceremony, Laura stood beside the governor as he put pen to paper. Cameras flashed and applause erupted around her. But instead of feeling triumphant, Laura felt humbled. This wasn't her achievement alone. It belonged to every person who had dared to speak up, protest, or demand better. As she addressed the crowd afterward, her voice steady and sincere, she emphasized the importance of unity. "This isn't the end," she said. "It's just the beginning. There's still so much work to be done. But if we continue to stand together, to push for justice and fairness, then real change is possible." Her words echoed through the room, leaving a lasting impression on those present. Many left the event feeling inspired, ready to carry the torch forward. Back home, Laura allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She walked through her garden, admiring the flowers she had planted earlier in the spring. They were blooming beautifully now, vibrant colors brightening the space. It struck her how much her life mirrored this garden. What had started as seeds of fear and anger had grown into something resilient and hopeful. Later that evening, as she prepared for bed, Laura glanced at the framed photo on her nightstand. It showed her and Matthew smiling together during happier times, before the chaos of the past year. She picked it up and traced the edges gently. Despite everything they had endured, their bond had grown stronger. They had faced challenges head-on, supporting each other through thick and thin. As she climbed into bed, Matthew wrapped an arm around her. "You okay?" he asked softly. "I'm more than okay," she replied, resting her head on his shoulder. "I'm grateful. For us, for our family, and for the chance to make a difference." The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the bedside lamp. Laura closed her eyes, feeling a deep sense of peace. The road ahead would undoubtedly have its share of obstacles, but she was ready. She had learned that even in the face of adversity, courage and integrity could light the way. Far away in a dimly lit prison cell, Frank Myers stared blankly at the wall. His once arrogant demeanor had faded, replaced by bitterness and regret. He often replayed the events that had led him here. The traffic stop, the blackmail attempt, the sting operation. If only he hadn't underestimated Laura Bennett. If only he had known who he was dealing with. But it was too late for regrets. The choices he and Carl had made had consequences, and now they were paying the price. Their lives were ruined. Their reputations tarnished beyond repair. Meanwhile, the world moved on without them, shaped by the actions of those brave enough to stand against injustice. For Laura, the scars of the past year would always remain, but they served as reminders of her strength. She had faced fear, intimidation, and betrayal, and emerged victorious. More importantly, she had turned a malicious act into an opportunity for transformation, proving that even in the darkest moments, light could prevail. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, Laura stepped outside to greet the new day. She took a deep breath, savoring the crisp morning air. Somewhere deep down, she smiled, knowing she had made a difference, not just for herself, but for countless others seeking fairness in an unjust world.